Hello, welcome back to my channel. This is going to be the last video that I shoot in this room. Doesn't mean that this is going to be the last video that you guys see in this room, because throughout September and possibly a little bit of October, you're going to get to see how much I actually pre-film. Today, we are going to be doing my August reading wrap up. As of right now, it is August 28th, but I move on the 30th, and basically I am packing away up until then, so I don't anticipate myself finishing any other books this month, except for possibly one arc that I have received. And if that is the case, please be sure to check down in the description below, because I will type up a short little blurb about that book. Let's talk about my stats for the month. I read 14 books this month, which is a lot lower than I've been reading recently, but I'm not disappointed in that number because at the beginning of this month, I didn't know that I was moving. I found out about 3 weeks ago, so it's been a long, crazy ride. And two, I tried to do Newts, I tried to do Tome Topple, but both of those got kind of knocked out because unfortunately we had to put my dog down this month, and that was really hard on my family. And then three, this past week dealing with work, I've been extremely stressed at work, which means I'm not listening to audiobooks when I'm at work, and oftentimes I get home and I'm still kind of stressed. So all of that together just means that I read a little bit less, but 14 books is still killer, honestly. Like last year at this time, I wasn't reading 14 books and I was like easy breezy beautiful. Maybelline, no. CoverGirl. So for authors of color, I only read 6 books this month with an author of color, and technically I would like to say that 2 of those are actually the same author, which you'll get to hear about very shortly. I wanted this number to be higher. Because I was doing Newts, I dumbly forgot to have that as one of the first things I was thinking about, and instead I was thinking about fulfilling prompts instead of fulfilling being decent human being who reads diversely. I read 5 physical books, although I count ebooks as physical just on this chart that I'm looking at, so I don't actually know how many of those were physical books and how many were ebooks, with an average of 300 pages in each book, which means that I listened to 9 audiobooks with the average of 825 minutes in each one, which I think is like just around 9 hours, I think. Out of all the books I read, 10 of them did have a diverse cast, including representation of race, LGBTQ plus representation, and diversity representation. And I will try to remember to mention which books those are, but I do kind of forget to talk about that a lot of times in my summaries. Out of all of those books, 10 of them were books in a series. The average rating I gave to books was a 3.625, so I think that's a little bit lower. It's actually a little bit higher than I averagely rated books in July. Out of all of those books, I did rate 1 book 1.5 stars, 2 books 2 stars, 2 books 3 stars, 1 book 3.5, 1 book 3.75, 2 books 4 stars, 2 books 4.5 stars, and 3 books 5 stars. So out of all the books I read, 3 of them were YA fantasy, 1 book was horror, 3 books were sci-fi, or one of those tried to call itself a thriller, but it wasn't a thriller. 5 books were fantasy, and 1 book was considered general fiction, which is kind of new for me. I don't read much general fiction. And let me give you a spoiler, it was good. That's all the stats I have for you all, so let me take you back to some of the pre-filmed stuff, and then I will cut back to me right now talking about the books that I read this last week. Yeah, I know, this is pretty dang sad. Hello, let's talk about the books that I read in the first 3 weeks. So since all of my books are packed, we're going to be looking at my iPad. I got photos of all the covers for you all so that I don't have to be uploading them here digitally. Let's really quickly talk about the 3 books that I DNF'd. The 100,000 Kingdoms by N.K. Jemisin. So I was reading this with my book club. I had a lot of things happening in my life. I don't think this book is DNF'd forever. I was just extremely bored with it and not wanting to continue on, and since I had so many other things going on, I decided to DNF it for now. This book is about a woman who is half of this royal line. Oh, this hurts. Yeah, I hurt my wrist, so this is gonna suck. She is half of this royal line, half of like regular normal humans, and she is called by her grandfather on the royal side to return back to the palace and to compete with these other two people to see who is going to be able to be the heir to the throne. And the thing that's really special about this place is that the royal family has control over gods, and so anything they say the gods have to do and listen to. So she is thrown into this world full of court politics and trying to figure out her mother's past. I heard the ending's really good, so that's why I want to continue on to it, but I just was so bored. The next book that I DNF'd, and it's another one that I think will just be on pause for the time being, is The Rage of Dragons. So I still can't tell you what this book is about, and I read 3 chapters of it, something like that. I listened to the audiobook and I think that was the mistake. I do own the hardback somewhere in one of these boxes, so I think next time I pick it up I'm going to be trying to read it with the hardback, and I think that'll help solve my problem. The final book that I DNF'd this month was Star Daughter. So I didn't know this was a contemporary fantasy. That's my own fault. I think a lot of people would enjoy this book. I was not one of them. Okay, so that's all I DNF'd. Wow, it's pretty awesome. I like when that number is lower because I tend to DNF a lot of books, unfortunately. So let's talk about the books that I managed to read this month. So the first day was our 24-hour readathon, so I started off by finishing a book that I had read 90% of in the month of July. So that was The Emperor's Blade by Brian Staveley. So I talk about this book in my last wrap-up. I also talk about this book in my 24-hour readathon, so I'm not going to talk about it here. Just know that I loved this book. 5 out of 5 stars. Asian-inspired fantasy, although the author is white, and I talk about that in the other videos. So go check out this book. The next book that I read also on that day was An Ember in the Ashes. This was a reread for me. I've read this book 3 times, I think, at this point, and I actually enjoyed it the most this time out of any of the previous reads. I think the first few times I rated it a 3-star. This time I rated it a 3.75. There was some issues I had with like the romancy side of things and just how the main 2 protagonists felt very normal YA protagonists, but other than that I loved all the characters, I loved the world, I loved the plot, and I am continuing on with this series, which I have read book 2 and 3 previously so that I can read book 4 when it comes out in December. So I think that when I read those ones I will up their rating even more. So in this book we are following, I think her name's Lila, so we're following Lila after her brother is kidnapped by this military government organization, and she joins up with some rebels who tell her that the only way they will help her save her brother is if she infiltrates as a slave into this woman's household, and this woman is a leader in this military school, and she has to spy on this woman because there is going to be a new emperor chosen. And so we're also following this boy named Elias, who is one of the contenders to be emperor. He also happens to be the commandant, that's her name, her son, and he is competing to become the emperor, but he also of course meets Lila, kind of starts to have feelings for her. It's YA, what do you expect? I really enjoyed the magic in this world, the plot in this world. My biggest issues were what I previously said, the main 2 characters. I think that this is a fantastic read if you're looking to pick up some YA fantasy that you don't necessarily want it to be so stereotypical YA. So the next book that I read was a short story, and that is, well, you've already seen it, The Mysterious Study of Dr. Sex, which is the prequel to Gideon the Ninth. I love Gideon the Ninth. I also read Harrow the Ninth this month, and I forgot to get the cover for that, so we're going to talk about both of them really quickly. The Mysterious Study I rated 2 out of 5 stars, and that is simply because it is a short story and felt like a short story. It felt like there was no purpose to the story. It felt like it didn't add anything to the world that I really needed to be added to my world. I felt like it was just kind of a day in the life of 2 of the characters, and it's specifically 2 of the characters in the 6th house, and I love those characters. Those characters are some of my favorite characters in Gideon the Ninth. So I was really kind of shocked that I got to the end of this and I felt like I hadn't cared at all about any of it. I then also read Harrow the Ninth later in the month, and I freaking loved it. So I'm not going to tell you anything about Harrow the Ninth because that'll be spoilers for Gideon the Ninth, but I will tell you that Gideon the Ninth is a story about necromancers in space. It is a sci-fi story that has a lot of fantasy and gothic elements. So there is a necromancer who is being called to the 1st house to basically pass this test to become an immortal being to serve in the Emperor on high, and she needs a soldier to help protect her while she's there. So she brings along Gideon the Ninth, who is basically her enemy, and the two of them have to watch each other's backs the entire time while Harrowhark is trying to pass the test. So Gideon the Ninth ends with a pretty big cliffhanger, and Harrow the Ninth picks up right after that. I freaking loved Harrow the Ninth. It was super confusing. It was super like, what is going on? There were such dark moments. There were such amazing moments. There were so many twists and turns. It was fantastic and I loved it. I rated that book 5 out of 5 stars. This one, no. So the next book that I read after that was the 6th Harry Potter. I also did read, this is really hard to do one-handed, I also did read the 7th Harry Potter. Both of them are 5 out of 5 stars. I'm not going to talk about them very long at all because we don't love J.K. Rowling, but we love Harry Potter. After that, I managed to read Children of Blood and Bone, and I actually did an entire video on this book. So if you want to know my thoughts in detail about this book, go watch that video. I really talk in depth about all my feelings and thoughts. I ended up rating this book 4 out of 5 stars because I really enjoyed the ending of the book, but I didn't necessarily love every single moment in it, and I'm a little bit afraid that in the sequel it's going to make me change my mind about what I rated this book, but we're not there yet. So the next book I read was Warbreaker by Brandon Sanderson. This is also a reread. I've read this book, this is the 3rd time. Love this book. It is my 3rd favorite book that I've ever read, ever. It is just fantastic. I think if you're looking for a place to start with Brandon Sanderson, this is a really good place to start because it introduces his easy writing, wonderful world building, fantastic characters, but it's in a more digestible amount because it doesn't have as many books as Mistborn has in it. There's only the one so far, and it's not as long as Stormlight is, but you still get a taste for how he writes and how good of a writer he is, and then it can help inspire you to check out Mistborn and Stormlight, which I think are fantastic books. So Warbreaker, we are following 2 sisters in this magical land where there's a lot of magic to do with colors and emotions, and I'm not going to get into the magic here. Anyways, we're following 2 sisters. One of them was supposed to be married off to the God King because this land that they live in is a small part of a larger nation, and this small part has claims to the throne, and so the throne needs one of their daughters to reestablish the claims to the throne. The daughter that was supposed to be sent, of course, is not sent, and the wrong one goes in her stead. The wrong one ends up adjusting to court way better than we thought she was going to, and the right one, which didn't end up going to court, ends up going after her sister to try to figure out how she can save her, and learns a lot about her people that live in this place. It is a fantastic story. I freaking love it. The ending gets me every single time. There's so many twists and turns just when you start to think that you're understanding who the bad guys are or what the plot is or like who's trying to kill whom. It all totally turns on you and it's so great. Brandon Sanderson has this way of really taking away everything from characters that they think they need and leaving them with the bare bones of what they actually have. And it is so good. So the next book that I read was an ARC that I got on NetGalley, and that is Athena's Choice. So this is a sci-fi story in a utopian futuristic society where all men have been killed off in a pandemic. I didn't know it was a pandemic when I started reading the book. And all that's left on Earth is women, and they've built this futuristic, highly technological, highly happy society where pretty much everyone is doing their absolute best. And so the real struggle of the story is whether or not they should bring men back, because everyone is absolutely at their happiest, but also they kind of feel bad that they killed men off in the first place. So we're following this one girl. I think she's like 20 something, around 20, although personally she felt more like she was in her teenage years, but I won't talk about that right now. We're following this one girl named Athena, and it really does kind of boil down to she has the choice of whether or not to bring men back. There's a lot more to the story, but of course the title already tells you that, so what else are we going to talk about with it? So I ended up rating this book 2 out of 5 stars. I felt myself being interested in it and being pulled into the story in the beginning. The chapters were really cool because it would be a chapter where it would start off and we'd have a narrative part of the story, so we'd be learning about Athena as she is kind of going about her life and interacting with this society. And then at the end of the chapter, we'd have some kind of mixed media format. So there would be news articles or like advertisements or something like that. And I really, really loved those moments of the book. They helped us build the world that was in the society, and it really helped bring in the world building and helped us understand the aspects of this world, this futuristic society that is so different from our own, such as there's this thing that is called a happiness tracker. I don't remember the exact name, and basically it analyzes all the choices you've made in your life and where your like levels and hormones are at this exact moment, and it can make decisions for you, telling you what choices in life would make you absolutely the happiest. That was actually really cool to learn about. But the parts where we were learning about Athena and her interacting with the other women in this world and her trying to decide whether or not to bring men back, they bored me. And that's the nicest way I can put it, honestly. I just didn't feel like I was connected to Athena. I felt like when she was I felt like when she was talking, I was just not caring. She felt very juvenile to me, especially how she was supposed to be portrayed. There were other women in the story that I also didn't believe their motives or their storyline. There was this one woman who is like her mom slash like partner figure, and she was supposed to be this like wise beyond her years person, and yet she was the laziest person in the story. She would say, oh, I'm the wisest person I know, and then she'd be like, but I'm just gonna live off of food stamps and the government instead of even trying to find a job or trying to take care of myself, because I know that they are required by law to take care of me anyways. And I just didn't feel like that was a wise thing to do. I don't know. Maybe I could see the argument that it was, but I wasn't loving any of the characters. The next book that I read was another arc. We're gonna go through a few arcs. So this one was called The Winter of the Wolf, and this was supposed to be a fantasy thriller, but I felt like it was much more of just a slice of life, murder, mystery, general fiction kind of a book. There really wasn't anything thrilling in it, and there really wasn't much of a mystery, honestly. I mean, there was a mystery, but I just didn't care about the mystery. So this book, we are following a girl the day after her brother has committed suicide, and I put that in quotation marks because she doesn't believe that he actually committed suicide, but all signs point to it. I'm just starting to notice that the cover has like writing inside of the fur. I don't know if you guys can see that or not. This is really cool to look at. I'm sorry, I need to stop staring at this cover, but there are so many like really small hidden things in here. The cover is the best part of this book. So she starts to investigate into her brother's suicide slash murder, trying to figure out what's going on with him, what happened, and her family is trying to deal with the grief of losing him all in their own way as well as she is. So the story really is more about grief and how different people handle grief, especially like grief around the holidays when you've lost a family member and you have to have a holiday like Christmas. How are you going to deal with it? It's a lot harder than you think it would be. So she, you know, questions his friends at school, questions his ex-girlfriend, questions police officers, questions her family, all to get down to the somewhat anticlimactic ending. I rated this book 1.5 out of 5 stars because everything about it was just kind of meh, and I really was bored through most of it, and I didn't care, and I wanted way more thrilling aspects. The next book I read, and this one doesn't technically have a cover, but this is the image that came along with it, is Juice Like Wounds by Seanan McGuire. So this is a novella that goes along with the Wayward Children series, specifically In an Absent Dream. So we are following Lundy as she returns to the Goblin Market when she is a child, and we see her meeting with Moon and what's the other girl's name? I don't remember the third girl's name. We are seeing them kind of build a small friendship, and then we're seeing the big event that happens that kind of breaks that friendship for the three of them. It's something that we know happens in an Absent Dream book, but we don't know how it happens or why or anything like that. So this book is that short story telling us everything about it. So like I said earlier, I'm not a fan of short stories. So I picked this one up thinking, if I hate this book, I'm never starting a short story again. But unfortunately, I loved this. I rated it 4.5 out of 5 stars. The only reason why I didn't get a full 5 stars is because it's a short story, and I felt like there just wasn't enough for me to rate it a 5 stars. Everything about it was great. The characters were great. The writing was fantastic. If you like the Wayward Children series, you're gonna like this book. Specifically, if you like an Absent Dream, it's just like that. I recommend checking this one out if you've read those. It was free online through Tor.com, so check it out. It was really good. I recommend. The next book I read, and this one also has its own video online, so if you want to check that out, that would be fantastic. And that is The Bone Shard Daughter by Andrea Stewart. So this book was also an ARC given to me by Orbit through NetGalley. Thank you so much. I was so freaking flipped when I saw that that happened. This is one of my most anticipated reads of the year. So as soon as I got it, I pretty much dropped everything else in my life and started reading this book. So in this book, we are following 5 different POVs in a world with some vast magic and some incredible world building. I have a whole entire video on it, so I'm not going to talk about it a ton here, but just know that I ended up rating the book 3.5 out of 5 stars because while the magic system and the characters were interesting to read about, I felt like the plot was really slow and kind of dragged. I would recommend it to people, specifically people who want to read an Asian-inspired fantasy with LGBT plus representation that also has almost no romance in it. I think that was one of the really interesting parts, was to have a sapphic relationship as one of the main relationships we see, but there really wasn't a ton of romance in it. So the next book that I read was an audiobook that I listened to, Kindred by Octavia Butler. So I didn't fully understand what this book was before I started reading it. I also, when I was trying to find this image, found out that it's a movie with Michael Fassbender, and oh my god, am I gonna go watch that like as soon as I'm done with this. Whew, I don't even know how to talk about this book. This is a hard one to talk about. This was a really intense book. This is a book that I think they should have people study in high school because it was so impactful and so powerful. So this woman is living her life in the 1970s and is suddenly transported into the past, into the 1815s, and she is confronted with a boy who is drowning. She saves his life and then suddenly is jumped right back into the 1970s. Except that this keeps happening over the course of about a week for her, where every few hours she's pulled back into this boy's life. Years have passed for him and he is on the verge of dying for one reason or another, and she has to save him. So there's lots of connections between the two of them. She is a black woman and he is a white slave-owning male, and they kind of have this relationship built between the two of them where she's trying to teach him to understand that black people are humans and they should be treated with respect, and he's trying to teach her basically that like he owns people, he bought them, he has a right to them. So it's really rough to read. There are lots of trigger warnings in this book. There are lots of horrible things that happen in this book. I talk about it in one of my reading vlogs. I believe it's the week 3 reading vlog. So if you want to know a lot more about the triggering events in this book, I talk about it right as I finish it with you all there towards the end of the video. So go check that out. It was also so powerful. There was this whole entire commentary about how the white people would try to tell her that, well, being a slave for a good master was better than being a slave for a bad master. And she would turn to them and say, being a slave at all is bad, no matter how good or bad your master is. So don't tell me that. Even if your master is the best man in the entire world, he owns another human being, which means that he is not a good person. And it was hard to read. It was really rough. I recommend the audiobook. It was really good. It's a pretty short book overall. I think it was like 11 hours in the audiobook, so that puts it on just under 300 pages in the physical book. Probably changed my life, to be honest with you all. It's 4.5 out of 5 stars. The only reason why it didn't get a full 5 stars is because it was just so hard to read, and that impact is powerful and wonderful, and I'm so glad it was there and it was so necessary, but it's hard for me to say that I necessarily enjoyed myself while reading this book, because it's not a book that you go to read and you're like, wow, hunky-dory friends, I loved that, it was so good. It's a book where you're like thinking about it afterwards and you kind of feel miserable for a few days, but I still think everyone should read it anyways, and I definitely think this is something I would reread. Kindred. Whew, okay, I left my drink over there, so I want to be drinking it again, and that means we're gonna go through this last one as quick as possible. The final book that I read in the first 3 weeks was Misery by Stephen King, and my hands are tired, so I'm gonna stick this up here. There we go. That's awful to see, but I apologize. We're just gonna talk about it real quick. So Misery is a book by Stephen King. It was presented to me as a suspense thriller where there is a famous author and he has been kidnapped by his #1 fan, and she has basically told him that she won't let him go until he rewrites the ending to the favorite series, because he has just killed off the main character in order for him to no longer have to write those series anymore because he's sick and tired of writing them. But of course, the biggest fan isn't mentally correct. I don't know exactly what's wrong with her because the book never actually goes into those details. They don't put a name on what's wrong with her, but you can tell very easily that something's not right with her. So she keeps him hostage and puts him through literal torture until he writes a proper book that undoes the death of the main character. So this book wasn't at all what I thought it was going to be. It was slow and boring through the first 60% of the book. Honestly, up until 25% through, I was like, I'm gonna DNF this. I'm so bored. But I kept reading because it's pretty short actually. And I don't know, I guess I'm happy I finished, but at the same time, now that I'm at the end, I'm like, nothing super special happened in it. There were a few select moments, basically from 75% to 85%. There were some really intense, thrilling parts that I was like really into, but absolutely the rest of the book I was just kind of like, okay, when's this gonna be done now? The like thrilling parts don't pick up until after the 60% mark, and once they start happening, they are extremely gory and they are extremely bloody. So if you have any kind of issues with that at all, don't read this book. But I don't have issues with them, and there were a few moments that had my skin crawling, but they were so few and far between that I don't think I could recommend this as a good Stephen King book for other people to check out. There were some great writing moments throughout. I think that Stephen King really had a good idea with this book, such as there was this whole entire metaphor of pain, comparing it to waves. I loved that. That was great. And there was this whole entire part where like the writer is trying to explain writing to his #1 fan, and it really felt like Stephen King was sitting in that chair trying to talk to us as his fans, explaining like, look, I know I do things that you don't understand, but it's good writing, so who cares whether or not you like it? So those were kind of enjoyable to read, but overall I wasn't attached to any of the characters. I said in my mid-year stats wrap up that I wanted to be trying to read more male authors because I pretty much don't read male authors. And so this was in a slight attempt to read some more. I have read Stephen King before. This is my least favorite Stephen King I've read yet. And I think this one really had some of those moments that make people go, Stephen King is such a male author. Other books that I've read by him have had those moments too. Pet Sematary really had a big one that I was just kind of like, ugh. And then The Shining has a bunch throughout, and The Outsiders has a few as well. But this one just had some moments where I was just like, wow, is this how men talk in their heads to themselves? Is this how men write? Because apparently I'm not missing a bunch by not reading male authors, because this is weird. There was this whole entire scene where the main character is receiving CPR to save his life. Oh, bye. Receiving CPR to save his life, and he compares it to being raped. And then there's this other scene where there's a murder happening and it's also compared to rape. And I just was like, not a fan of that comparison. And then there was also, of course, we are looking at this storyline through the main male, and there are these moments where he's looking at the main female, the woman who has captured him, and it was just like, I don't know how to describe it other than like, that's how he was thinking, and it was kind of gross, and I didn't care about it. And I would love to say things like, oh, Stephen King was just trying to write a specific type of man, and that is what he got his point across with. But so far, it feels like every single book that I read by Stephen King has a male in the main driver's seat of the story who is like this man. And I'm like, Stephen King, is this how you are in real life? Also, by the way, in case you didn't know, I used to live within 20 minutes of Stephen King, so I should have asked him when I lived there. Anyways, I rated this book 3 out of 5 stars because even though I had some major issues with it, it wasn't a horrible book. There were some good moments. Final note on Misery. I did listen to the audiobook for it, and I think that was kind of an interesting choice. I really like audiobooks that are thrillers and horror because they just pull you in. But one of the things I felt like was really weird about this audiobook was that it was narrated by a woman, And I felt like that was odd because the main voice throughout the whole entire story is male, and I'm really curious to know why they decided to use a female narrator. And I'm wondering if it's because the moments that I kind of previously talked about with the like gross maleness of it would have sounded so much worse coming from a man. I don't know. I don't actually have proof that that's why they did it, but if any of you know why Misery was narrated by a woman, please let me know down below because I'm super curious about that. That's the last of the books that I read in the first 3 weeks, so here you are for the books that I read in the last week of August. Hello, welcome back. So, starting off at the top of the month, it's not the top of the month, starting off with where I finished up at the end of week 3, Kavav, or as most normal human beings call it, Children of Virtue and Vengeance. I loved this book. I'm going to be having a full review, non-spoilery, but a full review coming out in the end of September. I think it's gonna be week 3 of September, so stay tuned for that. It'll be a Friday video. In the meantime, I ended up rating this book 4 out of 5 stars. This is the sequel to Children of Blood and Bone, which I also read this month, and I also really enjoyed. So that video is already up, but if you're waiting for this one, it'll be coming up sometime in September. And the final book that I read this month was Trail of Lightning by Rebecca Roanhorse. I listened to the audiobook for this. Get comfy, kids. We're about to have a nice little talk about this book. So I'm actually going to set this down, so I hope you had a nice look at it. I'm going to not hold things up for a really long time like I did in the last few shots. This book is a book written by a Navajo woman about a Navajo woman, and it is definitely a fantasy, no questions asked. It takes place in a near future dystopian world where basically flooding has happened all over most of the world, and so the only people that are left alive are people who were living at higher elevations. This woman lives on her own, but she lives near a lot of indigenous people, and so she helps them out a lot with their issues. In this world, people have something called clan powers, and basically it seems like you get a gift from your mom's side and from your dad's side, and the gifts are related to whatever your clan was. So our main girl is dealing with the fact that her clan gift is something horrendous, and she feels like she herself is a monster and that she is evil. So she's kind of separated herself from society, lives out on the outskirts of town kind of thing by herself with her dogs, and every once in a while people call her into town to track down a monster that usually has done some type of evil. The story opens up with her hunting down a monster that has taken a girl from the town. She very quickly takes care of the situation, and then the rest of the story is her trying to figure out where this specific monster came from because there seems to be something different about him. She is joined pretty early on in the story by this medicine man who his clan powers have a lot to deal with healing and some other kind of stuff I won't get into. And she is like this loner who just wants to be left alone but feels obligated to bring him along for certain reasons that I won't go into, and the two of them strike up an unlikely friendship, of course, and end up doing a lot of good, a lot of bad, and some really, really dark shit, honestly. This book was rather short, and I picked it up because I am on the hunt for more indigenous books, and since I love fantasy, I thought I would start with this one, and I was very interested in this one because not only was it written by a Navajo woman, but it was written about a Navajo woman. I was really, really into the fact that it was own voices. I really enjoyed this book through most of the book. I found myself not necessarily loving the main character because she's not the kind of character for you to love. She's very harsh. She's very hard. She has lots of hard edges. She's not a soft character, and she's not like the kind of person you want to go hang out with on the weekend. But I really appreciated the way that the author kind of like flipped some gender norms. So we have, of course, a main female and a main male, and there are certain things that seem to be like flipping of the gender norms with them. So like she's obsessed with knives and killing, and he's obsessed with fashion and looking good. Like he wears makeup throughout the book. I don't think it's like constantly every day, but there are definitely times where he's like, going to a party, let's put on some makeup. And she's like, oh, I don't want to wear makeup, that's such a hassle. So there were some really great gender norms flipped. Those weren't the only ones, but those are the ones I'm going to mention really quickly. There was also just some really good moments where we're learning about the culture and we're learning about this world, and I was so intrigued by it because there's this whole entire other aspect of the book where after the floods happened, it allowed for these gods to be released onto the earth, and the gods kind of interact with humans, who they call the Five Fingers, at different times. And it was really, really interesting. And I felt like I really got to understand a lot more about this culture that I was previously uninformed on. I had a few issues with the book, and unfortunately, almost every single issue I had with the book had to do with how the book ended. The plot was kind of all over the place. There really wasn't like one straight line of what was happening. Already what I told you about really doesn't describe perfectly what happens in the book. What I kind of talked to you about is really more of like the first 20 to 30% of the book, and then the plot just kind of goes everywhere. Like, I didn't feel one consecutive, like, this is what we're after and this is what we're going for and this is what we're trying to accomplish in this book. It was just kind of like almost these little side stories that didn't all seem to be resolved by the end of the book, and that kind of made me disappointed. And then also there was supposed to be this big, huge twist at the end of the book, and I think that if you're any kind of intelligent reader, you would have seen that plot twist coming from a mile away. And she does do this thing where like the plot twist happens and then another plot twist happens, but like both of those were predictable from pretty early on, honestly, into the book. There was also this character that we hear about through most of the book. The main character says she doesn't have a relationship with him, but it is quite obvious that she wishes that she did have a relationship with him. And they have some interactions that you see kind of near the end of the book, and I wasn't a fan of their interactions. I don't want to talk about those in depth, but there was just like at least one or two things that really bothered me. And then there was, I don't remember the exact phrasing, but basically it was like he had said the thing where he's like, I claim you, you're my mate, kind of a thing, and I hate that. I hate it. I don't like it, don't think it's cool, don't approve of that. But I still enjoyed the book. There were certain sections where I was really, really, really enjoying the book a lot, and then there were certain sections where I was kind of like, okay, what's going on right now? I think that maybe just this book and me didn't click with each other, honestly. I want to say two things on that before we wrap up this video. I would 100% reread this book. I would give it another shot. I would reread it again in the future. I think that it was a good book and important for me to read. I do plan on continuing on with the series because I think that a lot of the issues I had were specific to this one, and I think that if I continue on in the series, I believe the next book is called Storm of Locusts, that I won't have those issues moving forward. So I ended up rating the book 3 out of 5 stars. That's all, folks. That's it. That's all I have for you. Say goodbye to this room. You'll be seeing it in a few more videos and then it's gone. I'm gonna be saying goodbye to it much sooner than you will, I guess. Thanks for watching. Let me know down below if you've read any of these books. I'd love to talk to you about them. I don't remember how my outro goes, but until next time, I will talk to you all in the comments. Bye!